two players, Derek, where I think the regional representation is a big talking point for them. Of course, we've made a big deal of a first South American being able to qualify, but also, as you alluded to in the intro, Japan on a real resurgence in Hearthstone, really starting to dominate the APAC scene. But we're getting into game very soon, so now it's all about the lineups. And I think for Rase, potentially, from my perspective, the problem could be that very risky pick of the very low curve Taunt Warrior. How does it look in this matchup? Can he find a win with it?
It really is not looking good, Sottle. With the lineup of this build, especially being particularly anti-aggro, he's got that very low curve with even Shield Bearers thrown in there as well. And with a matchup that it can often steal a win against with the Miracle Rogue for Tansoku, he doesn't even have Scourge Lord Garrosh in there for that excellent weapon, the Shadow Morn, to swing things back in his favor. It's going to be probably the weak spot in his lineup, I would argue.
Yeah. What was his thinking bringing that deck to the tournament? He was the only player to bring it. Like, which matchups was he looking to get in his group that he didn't find?
I mean, I think with everyone realizing that the aggro lineup would be very strong, instead of going for an aggro lineup himself, Rase maybe went one level too far, predicting that everyone else would think aggro would be a great strategy, and then tried to counter that. But because there was not that much aggressive strategies for him, simply overthinking it for Rase here to an extent, I would argue.
I mentioned earlier that you're a big fan of Rase that comes primarily through casting a lot of his Copper performances where he's extremely dominant. And I heard you say earlier that you felt like he had incredible meta reads in a couple of those tournaments. Do you think it's just, you know, he got too far inside his own head for this tournament, just went too far?
Very possibly. I mean, it was, I believe at the first Copa America, he had a good lineup. The absolute best counter strategy we saw in that tournament was from Phenom, I believe, who had Quest Rogue in a tournament where everyone was bringing control decks. But for Rase, in the second Copa America, it was kind of similar to this, where we see he'd gone a little bit too deep into his own mind, overthought it, whereas he's a good player. If he's just bringing decks that are decent against the field, he should be able to get there because of how strong his in-game play is.
Well, let's focus in enough about the Taunt Warrior for now, because it's going to be Shudderwock Shaman versus the Taunt Druid in the open, and Tansoku full mulligan found that wild growth. Very essential in so many matchups, but Rase already, you can see just by the makeup of his opening hand, that wild Pyromancer in his hand, showing that he has, again, quite an anti-aggro build of Shudderwock Shaman. Is that going to harm him in this matchup?
I don't think necessarily, because one of the things I love a soundbite from one of the players is just talking about how versatile this Shudderwock Shaman is. Every card in the deck, it feels like it has multiple uses, because obviously Wild Pyromancer against something like an Odd Paladin is fantastic. You just clear up the whole board and swing things back in your favor. Even against these slower control decks, you can use it to activate Draw with Acolyte of Pain, which is absolutely what Rase needs to be doing here. It's all about finding that draw to get his Shudderwock online as quick as possible.
Coin's out the Manatide Totem. Coin is a very versatile card, much along the lines of what you were thinking. Even the coin can be used for multiple purposes in Shudderwock Shaman. Even useful as an ultra late game tool, so if you, for example, don't grumble your Murmuring Elemental, you still give yourself that Murmuring Shudderwock combo at the end of the game. But I do like him coining out the Manatide Totem here because it's such a great disruption turn. It stops the Oaken Summons or Ironwood Golem development from the opponent. And hey, in the perfect world, they just don't have the Spellstone or the Swipe to be able to deal with it, and it can just run wild.
That's exactly right. There was some consideration, which is why I like that he took that turn a little bit slow, that he should play it on turn 3, thus leading into the Saronite Chain Gang to try and protect it a little bit more, because keeping that Manatide Totem alive is very important in this matchup. But even then, as you said, it's demanding an answer from the opponent, which generally in Hearthstone is a very strong line of play, making them have an answer that they may not have.
Gluttonous Ooze, not a tech card that's going to find a lot of gas in this matchup, but still, drew a card, 0 mana 3/3 now in his hand, and is it worth even just tempoing out on the board right now? Because it would seem like a no-brainer, right, just to get a 3/3 ahead of the play, but is it even that competitive against the minions that are going to come down from Druid at this point?
That's the thing, with all of Druid's minions being so high health and low attack, it's not going to trade particularly well unless he can find something like a Lightning Storm or a Volcano, which he can then use the Ooze to take off the better half of the health total and follow up with some AoE. But then I think for Rase, his thinking is, when is it ever going to be good?
Right.
The board is only just going to get bigger later on, at which point having an Ooze on the board could be actively bad just for the likes of Volcano.
And I think you know, classically with Shadow Walk Shaman, getting cards out of your hand is
Yes.
just quite important, right? If you're going to eventually go for some big Acolyte Pyromancer play or Acolyte Volcano, or even if you're forced to activate Hagatha, which sometimes in control matchups you try not to, but you then start to fill up your hand with a bunch of junk that you don't really want, and it creates extra failure rates in that endgame Shadow Walk combo.
As for Tansoku, still does not have the most devastatingly impressive of hands, but as with both of these decks, what they do in the mid stages of the game is pretty underwhelming, all things considered. Obviously, the Druid, main thing they're trying to do is ramp up into that Master Okar or a Hadronox just to get it down nice and early.
Yeah. Worth noting, of course, no Black Knight in Race's build. That's something that we have been seeing a lot, and it's a huge boon to the Taunt Druid Taunt Druid matchup, because you don't even really need to go the Life Drinker OTK route anymore when you have Black Knight in your deck. You can just load up your Glacial Shards and your Black Knights, and you just clear the Druid board over and over again for the rest of the game, just with one single card, essentially, while generating a bunch of 6/6s for yourself. So that means Race is going to have to conduct this a little bit more honestly, if you can ever describe Shadow Walk Shaman as having an honest win condition.
That's right, what we saw from Viper and Bunny Hopper with their identical 120 card for 120 card lineup is only one copy of Life Drinker, which at first glance seems absurd, because it is kind of the thing that Shadow Walk actually does, is the Life Drinker effect. Outside of that, you can play it as much as you want, and it really doesn't activate all too much on the board outside of the 6/6s you get. But I like their thinking about it. You don't want to lower the health total of even Warlock for Hooked Reaver, and as you said, Black Knight is so devastating in this matchup.
Saronite Chain Gang coming down. Glacial Shard would essentially just be used for the mana allocation more than anything if he just wanted to get it out of his hand and get it cast. But, you know, as of right now, these Ironwood Golems are frozen anyway. Like, there's no armor on the Tansoku side, or not enough to activate it anyway. So I think that is more so than neutralizing the threat, just about using that Glacial Shard while he had a mana to spare. And also, he's just grumbling next turn. So
exactly. Protecting
his Saronites is a big deal, right?
Yeah, I love this play from Race. He's, again, demanding an answer from his opponent. He already saw a swipe onto the Manatide Totem earlier on, so the chances of this Glacial Shard dying is very low indeed. And then if it doesn't die, getting the extra Battle Cry in the pool of Shadow Walk is incredibly valuable. Glacial Shard is like one of the best Battle Cries in this matchup.
Hearthstone ASMR right here. 2 Saronites on board. Grumble in hand.
This is just even greater than it seems, because obviously in the immediate, you can get 2 more or 4 Saronite Chain Gangs onto the board, which is a great swing in your favor. But then later on in the game, you just give yourself the chance of getting even more Shadow Walks onto the board after the Grumble has activated in the pool of Battle Cries, which is fantastic in this matchup.
Yeah, having said that, we're getting very excited because this looks like an insane Grumble. But remember, Race, if he wants to have the guaranteed win condition with his Life Drinker combo at the end, which he does have to go for, more or less, because he doesn't have that Black Knight route, does have to Grumble his Murmuring Elemental from this point.
That's a fair point.
I'm just saying, because if you get a bunch of Saronite Chain Gangs in the pool, you get incredibly high percentage that your eventual Shadow Walk goes infinite, but it's not guaranteed. And I think that's the pause that came from Race there, because that was an incredibly straightforward looking turn, but there's just always that little doubt in the back of your mind about whether you want to go for that 100% setup with the Murmuring Element.
And I love that you brought that up, because it's a very important talking point in this matchup, because as the Shadow Walk against the likes of, say, a Control Mage, you have all the time in the world to give yourself the maximum chance of getting a 1-mana Shadow Walk back to the hand. But I would argue, against the Taunt Druid, you don't quite have that liberty. If they were to throw down a Master Oakheart on the following turn, that's a tremendous amount of pressure that you're then facing down with no Volcano or anything of the sort in hand. So Rase here does have to make some plays that will speed up the game a little bit, lock down his own board, because with no real card draw in hand apart from the Acolyte of Pain, his ability to end the game quickly will probably come from stalling it out with his own board control.
It's just one of those games where just everything seems to be working out perfectly for Rase. It's like living life as Brian Kibler. Just everything seems effortless to you. He has that incredible turn where 2 Saranites lives and he gets to grumble both of them. And then that Pyromancer, Lightning Bolt, Acolyte of Pain, everything about that was perfect. It cleared the 3-4, it softened up the 8 health minion to a 7 and allowed his grumble to trade through. And he drew a card off the Acolyte cycle and got to drop down one of his discounted Saranite. That's about as perfect as a turn could line up.
Just makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. And now
like one of those satisfying videos of you just like slotting a book perfectly.
Oh, I love
into
those videos.
Yeah, exactly what that turn was.
Or like on the DVD thing when it's bouncing around the screen and it goes perfectly into the corner. Did you ever have that at school?
No, you think you saw it. You think you saw it, you didn't.
I definitely saw it. It happened to me, trust me, mate. As now for Tansoku, the more reliable build of Taunt Druid that he is playing with 2 Dragon Hatchers and 2 Sleepy Dragons. Coming into his benefit here, I suppose you could argue, because he still has a Sleepy Dragon to summon from the deck, but also to his detriment, because he has a whole bunch of cards in his hand, like all these dragons, that he doesn't really want to play. He wants to be going for stuff like Master Okar and Hadronox soon.
Just going to throw out that healing rain, cycle it, essentially doesn't see that he's going to be under any major pressure in terms of his health total anytime soon, so that is just 3 mana draw a card, more or less, from that Wild Pyromancer Acolyte of Pain combination.
As I believe, looking at the deck list, that Sandbinder doesn't actually have a target anymore, with Murmuring, 2 Glacial Shards and Grumble pulled from the deck. But still, for Rase here, he's had a very nice amount of card draw, and we were talking about having the liberty to go all in on the card draw, and while you generally don't have that in this matchup, because of Rase's fantastic lines of play, locking down his board control so decisively, he's given himself that liberty.
Just a 2-4. Plays it out anyway, just wants to contest the board for as long as he can. He doesn't have any of his mass removal in hand right now, the Lightning Bolt, Volcano, Lightning Storm and Volcano kind of stuff. So yeah, just fighting with stats as honestly as he can for now does seem to make a lot of sense. And the added upside, I guess, of that Grumble play that we didn't really even talk about is that it's just so much stalled, right? He got extra copies of Saranite, Chain Gang and Glacial Shard in his hand, which are just the best cards in the matchup for just buying yourself extra turns.
Absolutely, and like you said, good in the immediate, good in the late game as well. The fact he's got so many of these powerful battle cries already in the pool, he's going to be playing to his advantage quite drastically. And now, we've been hailing how well things have been going for Rase. For Tansoku, they're going to have to pick up pretty drastically. And while Rase will obviously be afraid of another dragon being pulled out of the deck, we can see that's not even a possibility.
Yeah. Rase not even going to learn, although I think trading your 2-1 there into a 2-2 kind of gives it away, but he's not going to get the 100% confirmation, but he's got a damn good read that there is a Sleepy Dragon in hand right now.
So now the only remaining card in the combo to actually make this work for Rase, I think, is Shudderwock itself. We've seen Grumble, we've seen Saranite, Chain Gang, Glacial Shards, there's the Life Drinker, so we can just start shooting them off as soon as he manages to find that Shudderwock. But with no card draw left in hand, how he does that is a little bit more difficult. Do you think he has to go for Hagatha here just to try and find some more removal options? Or does the fact that he could potentially fill up his hand with useless spells deter him from that?
It is a worry because his hand isn't dumpable right now. Sometimes you get Hagatha and you have 3 or 4 spells in your hand already, and then you can actually create space in your hand by throwing out those natural spells that you have. Every card in his hand, apart from that Healing Rain, replaces itself right now under Hagatha conditions, which is going to be a slight worry for him.
As Rase feeling in, I would actually agree with him here that he can just play out his minions, and that should be enough just to tide him through. 12 cards left in his deck, some of which are just straight up card draw to help him cycle through. And the Glacial Shards, and just Volcanoes. He's got removal as a bunch of his cards in there. There's not
still both hexes, right, as well in the deck.
There's not that many bad draws left for him. And with the Lich King himself being thrown down on the board for Tansoku, that is pretty much the target you want to hex most of all, outside of Hadronox, obviously, to completely deny Witching Hour value. Because you deny a very, very scary target, which then cannot be resurrected with Hadronox. And after you've played that Hex, diluting the Witching Hour, giving them a chance to resurrect the Frog itself, instead of the Lich King itself, as I say itself about 20 times in a sentence, is very powerful.
Dealing with this Lich King is going to be somewhat awkward, though. It's not pretty. He can do it with Hagatha, he can do it with Lightning Storm, or if he really feels spicy, he can leave it up for a turn and just neutralize it with a Glacial Shard. But when you have so few minions left in your deck, and one of them is Shudderwock, I don't think you want to be giving your opponent Lich King cards under any condition, because a Death Grip stealing that minion away from you can just straight up be the end of the game at this point.
That would pretty much just be the end of the game, I think, at that point. And outside of that, Anti-Magic Shell could be very fantastic. Even Frostmourne, just to swing things back into Druid's favor.
Right.
As a very, very cute play is made that always seems to fly under the radar of Murmuring Elemental into Hagatha for a 6 damage sweep on the board. And at this point, because he was able to play so many of his minions before the Hagatha came down, it may seem like a disadvantage at first, which, you know, it still arguably is that Rase did not get many spells.
Right.
I think overall, pretty happy.
Oh, that is ugly. Tansoku just ripped the Army of the Dead, and only one minion, which is a 9-mana 2/4 that pulls nothing from his remaining deck.
This is when Recruit goes horrendously wrong. He got both Ironwood Golems before he got any Oaken Summons. He found 3 of his dragons before he got a Dragon Hatcher on the board. And another card in this matchup, Mind Control Tech, which is absolutely fantastic after the Shudderwock comes down. I think Rase could very happily just throw it down over the next few turns for no immediate value, just to get the Battle Cry in the pool, because then all of a sudden that means if Tansoku does go for some line of play with Hadronox making a giant board, Rase can just steal one of those taunts to protect himself.
It's very true. And let's not get too carried away here, because people get very excited about burning cards and how detrimental it is. But yeah, Tansoku obviously would have loved to just rip out a huge board of minions there, but whiffing and having all of those spells burned is actually not too big of a deal for him, because, you know, things like Oaken Summons at that point were fairly useless to him.
That's true.
He didn't want to draw those cards. So actually he's essentially cycled those cards with the Army of the Dead. Obviously, Naturalize is a very useful tool, and I think he dumped a Nourish as well, which, you know, he wouldn't have been too happy with.
But then at the same time, one of the weaknesses of Shudderwock Shaman is while their board clear, their main board clear in Volcano is very powerful, it's not as powerful when in the extreme cases as Equality Consecration or Brawl. It absolutely has its limits. So if Tansoku had been able to pull out some of the larger minions from his deck, he could have left himself in a position where he was simply invulnerable to it, and then try and follow up with a branching path to close things out quickly. Because, make no mistake, Tansoku here still has to be on the aggressive. This has to be finished sooner rather than later for him.
There is the Volcano. So he now has Lightning Storm and Volcano in hand, which can take away huge chunks of the board state, but still often not enough against a decent-sized Hadronox Revival board. And with Rase not having hexed anything yet, there is a big old board coming back when that Hadronox gets played.
For Tansoku, it's just still not there. Oakheart, I guess we'll pull it out, but the lack of card draw for Rase is really starting to hurt him now. For both players, the key card in the matchup with Shudderwock and Hadronox respectively kind of feels like a race to find them.
Perplexing.
Perplexing indeed. This Rase, consider, like, the Pyromancer here is starting to lose value, but he still has an Acolyte of Pain remaining, I think, which helps him cycle. Also, Pyromancer plus Lightning Storm plus Volcano suddenly starts to take massive chunks out of a huge board that comes down. So there's several considerations as to why he wants to hold on to that and not just cycle it for a card. But yeah, he is now going to very much be forced to act. But of course, the downside of the Naturalize is that Tansoku himself is now just digging Rase closer to the cards he needs, but it's just not there. Never mind. Forget I said it.
A multitude of very strong plays available to Rase right now. As you said, there is a huge amount of health on the board, but it seems fairly easy with Wild Pyro, Lightning Storm, Zap, and Volcano that he would be able to clear off, if not everything, the vast majority of the board at least. And even if he can't do that, just a Hex into a Volcano Lightning Storm, something like that, some form of combinations of removal should be able to get him at least halfway there. But then on the other side, if he doesn't want to go with the spell clearing route, just the minion line of play, activating his Shudderwock for next turn also feels very powerful.
It's actually just so much health. Even after a Pyro Lightning Storm, if it was to do like 3 across the board, there's still 28 health left on the board.
Really?
If I counted that correctly, yeah.
He could throw down a Zap as well to do another sweep.
Right. That's assuming a full low roll on the Lightning Storm, so it is slightly better than that, but yeah, it's still not enough to completely chew through this board. And with 3 Glacial Shards built up inside this this Shudderwock, I think he's feeling like it's time to just go in.
Absolutely, and with if he gets a Shudderwock back in hand, which he does, another Hagatha activation ready to come down, or it will actually be 2 Hagatha activations because he's got the Murmuring Elemental Battlecry in this Shudderwock. So a 9 damage board sweep, I believe, available for Rase on this turn.
My jaws that bite, my claws that catch. My jaws that bite, my jaws that bite, my jaws that catch.
As we just get to witness the absolute disgusting power that Shudderwock can deliver when able to activate at full power. This just feels for Tansoku like there isn't really a way back in, even with Witching Hour able to go in at full capacity with no frogs in the pool of dead beasts, I believe. Rase still in a position where he's just looking so good.
Well, that was fun.
I can see.
Game 1 goes to Rase. Yeah, easy to focus in on just trying to clear that board the old-fashioned way, but he recognized that, like you said, with all of those Hagatha activations, even if he did not get into an irreversible winning position, which he was likely to do anyway, the board was going to get nuked down with 100% consistency. Tansoku was just going to have no game to come back against that, and that's kind of the story of Shudderwock matches, right? Like, very, very rarely do you see a Shudderwock actually resolve to the point where someone dies anymore. It's just the player on the other side says, all right, can't beat that.
At some point, they will destroy you. And there for Tansoku, it's got to be said, while he did get some decent draws early on, the Wild Growth, something like that, his deck just did what Recruit Effect sometimes does. There's always the potential for your cards to come in the wrong order. However, he's still got some very strong decks left on his side of the lineup to swing things back in his favor. In particular, that Miracle Rogue that we've seen with a very high percentage win rate so far at the Summer Championships, still leaving him in a respectable position.
Yeah, and crucially, as this is Conquest as well, it's not really like the strength of your best decks, it's the weakness of your worst decks, right? And I think for Rase, he still has that Taunt Warrior, which is going to be the big crux of the series. But while these players just take a moment to gather their thoughts, let's learn a little bit more about them.
ツンさんっていう日本のプレイヤーの人とかが世界大会で活躍してるのを見て、自分も大きな大会に出たいなって思ったのは覚えてますね。
And he is riding that Control Warrior victory all the way to the Summer Championships.
Another Japanese player qualifying for the Summer Championship, and he's going to Los Angeles. Look at it, it's beautiful, and Tansoku is going to be able to experience all of that.
今回チームメンバー1人じゃなくてフレンドの日本人のフレンドの人と、一緒に調整しました。で、初めてこういう練習の仕方でやったので、それがうまくいったのかなっていうのはあると思います。名前の由来とかでもいいんですかね。足が短いから短足だみたいな。スポーツ観戦とかですね、サッカーとか野球とかあと相撲とかそういうのを競技的なスポーツを見るのがすごい好きですね。結構人生がもう変わるレベルの出来事だと思いますね。賞金もそうですけど年末の世界大会に出れるのでやっぱり夢があると思います。負けてもいいやって思ってますね。負けても自分になんか期待しなければ緊張しないと思うので、そうですね、負けてもいいやっていう感じでプレーしてますね。そうですね、神社にお参り行ったんで多分勝てると思います。
Rase. I'm from Brazil and play Hearthstone. Before Hearthstone, I used it to play Pro Evolution Soccer, and I play it at the Worlds. I'm trying a lot to make it at Hearthstone too, so I will play Worlds at 2 different games. I'm a really competitive guy. I love to compete, I love to win, to be the best as I can. My family is amazing, like my parents always want the best for me, and my brother is the best. He's always cheering for me and crazy with my achievements. It's really cool to have a good support by my family. 2 South Americans playing this HCT, so I think we have a good chance to make it to the Worlds. I'm pretty confident, and I think Nalgidan should be too. It's the 2nd time Nalgidan is playing this HCT. I hope I don't face him because I really want both of us make it through the Worlds, like 2 Latin American playing the Worlds. It will be amazing, but if I need to play against him, I hope I win. I'm the only player in the world that qualified for the 3 Copa Americas, so I'm on a streak this year. I hope I can make it.
Welcome back, everybody. As you can see, we have finally opened our doors to the adoring public. Day 3 now. People are starting to filter in to check out some hot Hearthstone action, Derek, and we have the hottest in front of you. Rase versus Tansoku got off to a fantastic start with game 1. Very intricate control matchup, and that's pretty much the story of this championship so far.
It has been indeed some very difficult games with the likes of Control Mage, Shadowwalk Shaman, but for some players it's been a little bit easier than that with all these control decks knocking about. The likes of Recruit Hunter and Miracle Rogue have been doing fantastically well, and so for Tansoku, even though he is 1-0 down, I would be very surprised if he can't secure himself a win with this Miracle Rogue.
Yeah, just a small correction. I was alerted to the fact that potentially the opening matchup graphic was incorrect in front of the bans. Apologies for that, but it's Hunter that is banned for Tansoku. That big, greedy anti-control deck will not get to be played. Makes perfect sense against Race's lineup, because, I mean, how is his Taunt Warrior going to beat a Recruit Hunter at this point?
I mean, none of his decks beat Recruit Hunter. Exactly. It is designed to be the 4 decks that Race has brought pretty much exactly. As for both of these players, respectable hands to get things going. Rase with Wrath and then the Spellstone as well. 2 of the most crucial cards in this matchup, because if you let some of the early minions for Rogue, like Hench Clan specifically, or any minion with Cold Blood on it, live for too long, they will just kill you before you can do any of your crazy stuff with Hatronauts. Yeah, and I think, my understanding of the Taunt Druid side of this is you want to be quite greedy with your armor gain tools, because it's very important for you to upgrade those Spellstones, right? Which, Race doesn't have that problem because he does have an Oaken Summons in hand ready to rock with that lesser Spellstone already. But you quite often see, armor gain cards just not being used in kind of weird looking spots in this matchup, right? 'Cause it's so important to do 4 with a Spellstone. Exactly, and a perfect example of that in hand for Race. We often see players going for the Ironwood Golem in hand first before they play the Oaken Summons, because obviously the downside is you could draw the remaining Ironwood Golem, but the benefit is you could draw a Spellstone and then you upgrade it, thus giving yourself a much higher chance of being able to kill the key minions, as we see here, like Questing Adventurer in particular, which is not represented in all of the Miracle Rogues at the moment, but is definitely starting to creep its way in as a strong anti-control card. So Derek, as our resident Miracle Rogue expert, Casey wasn't available. You've got to stop saying that. We tried to get him in, he wasn't available, so we have to make do with you. How do you feel about these tech choices? Hallucination is a big one for me. Very, very rare these days, but Questing Adventurer as well, often not too common. I personally am not a fan of Hallucination. There are always examples that people tout to me as to why it's fantastic. I believe at DreamHack Summer, Just Saying got Twig of the World Tree off of Hallucination and thus gained 10 mana on turn 6 with his dagger, which was truly disgusting. But generally I find the point of Rogue now, Miracle Rogue I should say, is just to cycle through your deck as quick as possible, because you're going to have so many spiders in your deck, and against a lot of decks at the moment, getting them out as quick as possible is just how you win. And speak of the devil, Falderay Strider is, I believe, going to be coming down very quickly for Tansoku. It's a mark that you're slowly starting to make it as a caster, Derek, when you can just say things and the perfect card comes off the top to illustrate your point. It happens way more than you might expect. Now, like you said, some of those armor gain tools available for Race, he didn't even want to go for. It looks like on the previous turn, Ferocious Howl into Jasper Spellstone, because from where he's sitting, he had a perfectly good answer in Wrath and Hero Power, because Wrath can get a little bit shakier later on in terms of what it's actually killing off, because you can't always have the mana to fit the Hero Power in to kill off a 4 health minion like Gadget-san or Faldere Strider, whereas Spellstone is just always going to be fantastic for the rest of the game.
Yeah. And I think also just a small upside that you can perhaps hold on to it, be as greedy as you can, and if you don't have to use it, getting it to 6 might help you against that questing adventurer that we just saw in the key cards.
Or even an Edwin itself. Very often with this deck, because you have so many cards that require a combo, like Elven Minstrel and Faldere Strider, I find a lot of the time, until you're in the super late game with Gadget-san Auctioneer, Edwin tends to be a lot smaller nowadays than we saw in the previous expansion or the previous rotation when there was counterfeit coin knocking about as well.
This is a hand that's just gagging for an Auctioneer right now.
And Tansoku can start to fish for it from his deck, as, I mean, the first play I'm looking at here is a starting point, just coin Elven Minstrel Sap. It's not perfect because you really don't want to be using the Sap this early on something that isn't like a Sleepy Dragon, which is why I can absolutely respect going for the backstab.
Yeah, I don't even think it weakens your Auctioneer turn that much to use the backstab, because you know the Sap can be used alongside your preparation on your Auctioneer turn anyway. It's not the highest value prep card you can use, obviously. Fan of Knives is much more mana efficient and sometimes frees you up more mana to draw extra cards. But on an Auctioneer turn, sapping the thing that your opponent has on board is just incredible, because this then force your opponent to, from an empty board, answer your Auctioneer, or the game ends.
Right. As from Rase there, one of the nice twists we see on the Taunt Druid deck list, I believe him and Nalgadan are both bringing in Spirit Singer Umbro, showing a surprising respect from Rase for an anti-control strategy, whereas the vast majority of the other techs in his decks seem to be more anti-aggro, so it's good to see that it wasn't completely all in on an anti-aggro strategy for him.
Yeah, it's a good catch. It's a very weird looking card, because there's a lot of tech options that Taunt Druid can't play, right, because of Oaken Summons. You look at Silence Effect.
The main one.
They can't play Spellbreaker or Iron Beak Owl because it completely ruins Oaken Summons. Spirit Singer Umbra is kind of in that thought process as well, because you don't want to be, you know, jamming it against an aggro deck and you just don't hit your 3/6 taunt. You get a 3/4. It's a little strange to me as well, because it doesn't really do anything until turn 9. You know, like, you don't have to be scared of this 3/4 right now. Just leave it there. Nothing bad is going to happen.
I don't think it's quite that clear, because obviously with no other minions on the board, like you said, it's not that threatening. But if you have any other minion on board, you don't care what it is, Cube comes down and it's just blowing out the game at that point. It's just one of those minions that has traditionally been so powerful in Hearthstone, like Fandral, Auctioneer, or Lyra, where if you don't kill it, you just kind of lose. But like you said, in the immediate, there's not really all too much for Tansoku to be afraid of, so obviously that Sap not coming down quite yet, and I love this as well from Tansoku. He's not falling for the trap that a lot of newer Miracle Rogue players would fall into, of thinking it's all about Gadgets and Auctioneer, because that's obviously the flashiest bit, that's the miracle part of the deck, but shuffling those spiders in first and then ripping them out with the Auctioneer on a later turn is definitely, I would argue, the more consistent way of playing this, because you do, against the Taunt Druid, just want all those spiders as quick as you can.
Time waits for no one.
We've seen this game, this tournament, Miracle Rogue being one of the highest win rate deck lists, and Taunt Druid suffering a little bit, just being so successfully targeted. Start to see why. The Taunt Druid is just really struggling to do anything quick enough to really prevent Miracle Rogue from being able to just execute a perfect game plan here. Spiders are in, Cold Blood is landing on a minion with initiative, spiders are hitting the board, 2 in a row, prep still available to keep on going here, and with the Eviscerate draw, this is a wonderful looking turn for Tansoku. Just let down a little bit by those 3 or 4 dead draws in a row without an additional spider, but you will take 2 in that situation, right?
Tansoku has already got his cake. I don't think he could try and eat it as well with a couple more spiders.
I'm a greedy, greedy boy, Garrett. I subscribe to the Admiral school of Hearthstone, where you can get lucky consistently for 45 minutes, but as soon as one thing goes wrong, you're the unluckiest player to have ever lived.
Just instant close the game.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now for Rase. This is one of the biggest divergences I find between Taunt Druid and any kind of Druid that is allowed to play spreading play. Because one of the things you pray your opponent does as a Miracle Rogue is rely on one big minion, because that is what Rogue does. It assassinates single big targets with the likes of Sap, obviously not killing it, but dealing with it, and Vilespine Slayer in particular. This Lich King is not going to get the job done, and Rase simply knows it. It's a last-ditch effort in some miracle where it doesn't get killed off or sapped. But we can see that's a very easy sap target for Tansoku.
I love that call, by the way. This is what Rogue does. It assassinates single big targets with every card except Assassinate, which they don't play.
Oh, some pretty spicy options off of the hallucination here. Branching Paths for plus attack, whilst also drawing you a card off Auctioneer. I like the look of that a lot.
How much damage is there right now? 12, 16, 20, plus 8. Does he have lethal? He's one off, I think, because of mana. If he could dagger here, he would have lethal, I believe.
I think you're right. Or if he can find Cold Blood off the top, obviously. But even then, it seems pretty unlikely that there's any situation where Rase can rescue this one. Even what Doom Pact off of the top wouldn't have given him enough health to survive. It would have to be Doom Pact into Branching Paths, but even then, Tansoku looks like, as was prophesized, will be taking a win with this Miracle Rogue very handily indeed.
He just missed lethal from where I'm concerned. Just backstab your own guy, draw the Cold Blood. Come on. Easy.
Is winning every single time not good enough for you? You need to win every single time a turn earlier.
You have to win every single time in the most tilting way possible for your opponent. That's the key to that. Most importantly, Tansoku squares up the series, and you can start to see now, we talked a little bit yesterday about important wins in Conquest and unimportant wins in Conquest. That's kind of what the format is about, and it feels like both of the wins that we've seen were kind of a given over the course of the series. You know, the Shadowwalk was likely to get there, the Miracle Rogue was almost certain to get there. But the further we get in this series, Daryl, the more important matchups are going to come out, particularly from Rase's side.
That's exactly right. As we keep bringing up that key Quest Warrior victory, would put Rase in a great spot to take this slightly unfavorable series. But then on the other side, for Tansoku, that Taunt Warrior, oh sorry, that Taunt Druid that we've seen brought by a tremendous amount of the players here, but has done pretty terribly so far in the first couple of days. It's just too easy to target with the likes of a Control Mage perhaps, or some of the other more anti-control strategies with a Miracle Rogue. That could be the linchpin for Tansoku to not be able to take this series.
Yeah, it's interesting because we've talked a lot about how the aggro lineup can potentially come full circle and punish these kind of mid-rangey anti-control lineups. But then one of the big talking points yesterday was that the even lock is still found in that lineup, which when we're talking about trying to target decks like Miracle Rogue and Recruit Hunter, which have been so successful, why is your even lock in that lineup? Like, what is it doing there? Can you any justification?
I mean, I think from a lot of players I've been talking to about Evenlock, it's that they don't really want to bring it, but what else can they really do? It's just a solid deck that consistently does good enough. We've talked about it a lot. It's not amazing, but it's just always good enough.
But was there no place for an aggro mage or something to go into that lineup alongside the other aggressive options?
Maybe they anticipated some aggro decks from their opponents, and we know that aggro mage is very weak against any other board-based deck whatsoever.
Fair enough. Well, Druid Mirror coming up very, very sharply, and we saw that the Taunt Druid actually has only picked up 6 wins over the course of the entire tournament so far, and I think we've cast at least 2 or 3 mirrors at this point as well.
That's
and
true.
Not just us, but you know, we have broadcast 2 or 3 mirrors at this point as well, which means Taunt Druid has really not been beating too many other decks in the tournament. So it seems like if the Taunt Druids are going to find their wins, this is where it is. It's the mirror match that you really have to be looking to pick up your victory.
Absolutely. I'm somewhat surprised that the somewhat more under the radar, I suppose, Malagos Druid wasn't represented anymore, as a whole bunch of the players as we enter the end of this month's ladder play got fantastic results with that exact deck in Malagos Druid. But from quite a few of the players here, we've been hearing that they wanted to bring certain decks, but they just weren't quite comfortable with them. So they wanted to go with the decks they are more confident with in their own right. And we know Malagos Druid in particular, a very difficult deck to pilot.
Yeah, I think we will be seeing a great deal more of that deck if you tune in a week's time to HCT Italy. I think that is when we will start to see the real big breakout of that Malagos Druid, although you can argue that it should have been when Hunter Ace showed everyone the way and won HC Tokyo with Malagos Druid, right? No one followed in his footsteps. It's all been Taunt Druid and Token Druid at this tournament so far, except the one man who saw the Matrix, Shao T with the Spiteful Druid.
And speaking of seeing the Matrix, Wild Growth into Nourish into Master Oakheart, it's almost a meme already in Hearthstone that this is just what you want. This is why Taunt Druid possibly hasn't been doing as well as it could, because it hasn't got this perfect starting hand from Tansoku.
You see there what they're all playing for, the HCT Championship trophy, which first of all signifies, of course, the first place in this event, but most importantly signifies your spot in the World Championship later in the year. Next year, in fact. I forget, everything's been shifted forward so far. We just crossed the boundaries of the year in our HCT season now.
And immortalizing your name amongst some other fantastic winners of seasonal championships. Stanu, Dachi, Hoi, imagine being placed amongst players of that caliber.
Job's done.
You also get some fantastic footage of me clapping awkwardly behind you. That's part of the deal as well.
That's the real prize.
Yeah.
Another race here. Hero powering on turns 2 and 3 has to feel pretty dreadful indeed. He knows this is not going the way it was supposed to. His opponent has got all the cards he wanted. I mean, that's a more succinct way of putting it, if you will. He dead.
Just the small matter of 4 mana behind, and your opponent has Oakheart. Yeah, about that.
Yeah, and Tansoku has got a good Oakheart. His build of the deck is designed to get the best Oakheart as consistently as possible. Again, as I mentioned, 2 Dragon Hatchers, 2 Sleepy Dragons knocking about in there. So if the copy of Dragon Hatcher that comes off of Oakheart isn't dealt with immediately, plenty more dragons will be populating the board, which then, while Rase does have answers to it in the form of Spellstone, limiting the amount of mana he can do on developing his own game plan with recruiting Ironwood Golems and drawing cards off branching paths, could be pretty beneficial again to Tansoku.
How do you even start to address this deficit, though? Like, from Race's position, what hand does he hope Tansoku has here, and how do you even go about beating that with such a deficit?
I mean, you just try and think, what hand could they have that's so poor that they wouldn't draw cards off of Nourish? Because if they have anything half decent in hand at all, they would go for Ramp, because Ramp is so much better than drawing cards with Nourish in this Taunt Druid. So Tansoku, while he can be optimistic, even if there was just a Dragon Hatcher in hand for Tansoku as opposed to the dominant Master Oakheart, it would still be perfectly good enough, I think.
Actually, you saw off the Oaken summons, we talked about it earlier, that Umbra pull. We actually got a moment to ask Race himself why he thought it was a good inclusion in the deck.
Umbra at Taunt Druid is a really strong card, and I didn't saw too much people playing it, but I think if I do well with it this tournament, a lot of people will start to play it.
Fair enough. We will wait and see, and trends can be set by single tournaments like this. But so far, the two positions it's been pulled in, it's been fairly underwhelming. Just a stat deficit compared to what you could be getting from that Ironwood Golem.
And that's the problem. You just don't really want to pull it off Oaken Summons. It's not in the likes of Q-Block, where getting it early on, sticking it on the board is a huge threat. You want to do it against the control matchups in the hyper late game, when you have a Hadronox or any kind of taunt minion on the board, and then you go on the same turn, Umbra Cube, and give yourself a very threatening board indeed.
I wonder if you're ever supposed to keep it. I've never particularly played with it in the deck, but like in a hyper control matchup, like you say, it's just a random thought that occurs to me, whether you're supposed to keep it in your opening hand, so you can just choose to use it 15 turns later. Like, is that madness? I don't know.
That just feels like such a deficit. Like, why are you putting in your deck if it's getting you 1 card further away from Wild Growth and Nourish?
I don't know.
Is it better or worse than throwing away Keleseth off the mulligan? I ask you though, Sottle.
Better.
Better, right, obviously. As now for Tansoku, while that Dragon Hatcher was killed off, he does not care at all. He knows that for Rase, the ability to clear off a wide board is incredibly limited in a Tauntra deck. The only real way that Rase can actually pull this back is by developing his own win condition, his own Hadronok so quickly that Tansoku can't just snowball this to a victory before that happens.
And just gradually, turn by turn, this grimace on Race's face is just spreading further and further. There's just nothing.
He's running out of face for that grimace. One more bad draw and...
he's going to need a whole other face for that grimace to spread onto.
And again, the mana just not working out cleanly at all. If he goes for a coin 8 drop on this turn in the Primordial Drake just to protect him for the moment, he can't go coin Oakheart. So that's really just not a possibility at this point. But if he doesn't go for that and is met with a branching path, surely that's just too much damage.
He dead.
To ever pull things back. He truly dead.
Put yourself in Race's position though. Like, you know, we're having a bit of fun here, but you know, you come to a tournament with what you obviously felt initially was a good meta read. Turns out it didn't pay out because not many people kind of went to the second level that you were expecting to beat with the third level. And then you suddenly get into a situation like this where you're very unfavored in the series, and then the one matchup you have, just a Taunt Druid mirror where you should be on fairly even footing, your opponent just gets 4 or 5 mana ahead of you and blows you out. Like, it's just a miserable feeling to be for a Hearthstone player, and you can see it just all over Race's expressions right now.
These are the start of scenarios that start to develop players feeling like they're cursed. They're always determined to get so far, but never further than a certain position. As you know, Rase has to be feeling like, while obviously this has not gone his way, coming into the tournament, I believe it was Mega Man Music who's done some fantastic stats on who is ahead in each of the matchups, and it just feels like consistently Rase has found himself behind in pretty much every matchup.
As well as, I believe, on those stats, having the lowest win rate chance at the start of the tournament as well. Predicting the evolution of the whole bracket, he was down somewhere in the 20s, I believe, 24% or something
Very
to win the
unlikely.
tournament.
Yeah. As Tansoku does find himself with probably the 2 worst Lich King cards in this position, 2 turns in a row, but again, what more could you possibly want in this scenario?
He does have an 8/8, regardless of the cards that are being drawn off, and with this swipe being thrown to face, 12 going through that Sleepy Dragon, this is looking very, very clean from Tansoku's position. Lich King and the Oakheart do get to connect to the face. That 8/8 does end up ending the game without using any of those huge Death Knight cards, and yeah, that is just a heartbreaker for Rase, because I feel that was the pivotal point of the series. If he was going to cause the upset, which it would have been in terms of lineups, he needed that Taunt Druid mirror win.
Exactly. Mirrors so often feel that way. More so in Last Hero Standing, I would argue, but still in Conquest, very important to hit those mirror matches. But still, now for Tansoku, with only his even Warlock left, I think we've seen from Turner and Killen all day, that has been their undoing in the even Warlock. So still, if Rase can play some very beautiful Hearthstone with his Quest Warrior deck, he's got some very nice tricks up his sleeve with the Azalina Soul Thief thrown in there as well. With some creative play, he's still in it, but it's looking pretty dire for Rase.
Yeah, the even Warlock has done okay, I believe. You know, we're calling it potentially a bit of a weak point, but it's 10 and 11 overall in the tournament, right? So that's still only halfway through. It could end up with a very strong positive win rate. So it's not a massive weakness. It's just in a few lineups, it seems to be very polarized against what the rest of their lineup is going to be. But yeah, a couple of tricks you mentioned in Race's deck. Azalina Soul Thief in particular is like his big late game resource refill, right?
Yep.
Is there anything in particular you want to be taking from even Warlock with Azalina, or is it just like a resource refill?
It's just, I think, the thinking that after you've completed your quest, pretty much every card in your deck is just bad. Like with you have double Shield Bearer in there. He's thinking clearly just going to be taking as many cheap taunts as possible, throw them out onto the board to complete his quest, and then just take anything he can, maybe even a hooked Reaver or something, to just solidify his position and finish things off with Ragnar's hero power.
There you go. Well, we're going to take a quick moment, so guys, don't go anywhere. Conclusion of this series is coming right at you. We will be right back.
The Hearthstone Championship Tour continues. It's go time! This is the 2018 Hearthstone Summer Championship. Well played!
In this video, I'm gonna profile Rase, who recently earned his spot as one of the America's representatives in the 2018 HCT Summer Championship. Rase is one of Hearthstone's recent breakout pros. He's gone from being virtually unknown in 2016 to a serious threat on the competitive radar. Rase's rise started in 2017 when he secured a top 100 or better ladder finish every single month. That's insane. Then, in 2018, Rase proved himself in the tournament scene when he went on to win the Copa America Tour Stop. Rase is a player who relies on his ladder experience to carry him through tournaments. If you can think of a game state, chances are Rase has seen it before and knows how to navigate it. We're going to take a look at one of Rase's best plays from the recent HCT Summer Playoffs that earned Rase his spot in the Summer Championship. Let's take a look at the Group A winners initial match between Rase and Killin' All Day. It's turn 3 and Rase is already making rather unusual plays. Since there's a Doomsayer on Killin' All Day's side of the board, the natural instinct is to just pass the turn. Then, next turn, you can play out the Librarian and Mountain Giant together. That sounds pretty good, no? Rase decides to just throw the Librarian into the Doomsayer. What? But this play is so good. Rase knows that he's always playing Mountain Giant next turn, unless his opponent plays Spirit Singer Umbra because of the threat of a Possessed Lackey coming out. By playing the Librarian here, Rase not only gets the card, but also an upgraded Spellstone to deal with an Umbra next turn if needed. And if Rase didn't make this play, he'd have to counter a turn 4 Umbra by wasting the coin a turn later for the exact same play. And wasting coin could delay Rase's power turns, like Lackey into Dark Pact on turn 5, or Blood Reaver Gul'dan ahead of the curve on turn 9. And in fact, Killin' All Day has the Umbra in hand and slams it on turn 4, only for Rase to remove it exactly as planned. It's disciplined expertise like this that earned Rase his spot in the Summer Championship. This has been our profile of Rase for the HCT Summer Championship. Good luck to him in the tournament. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, brought to you by the coaches at GamerSensei, please visit playhearthstone.com/esports for more of the well-played series and all things Hearthstone esports.
Well played!
Once again, you see some shots of our fantastic crowd hanging out in the tavern, jamming some Hearthstone themselves while watching some of the best in the world duke it out, and that's exactly what we have here, Derek. Rase, someone you are a huge fan of, and of course Tansoku, one of the best players in what has to be considered one of the strongest Hearthstone nations in the world right now. I was baffled. I did an interview with Japanese media yesterday, and they alerted me to a statistic that I wasn't aware of, where they actually had the most players in APAC playoffs this season. They had something like 26 out of the full 72 field players. Wow. That's incredible for a nation that we didn't really hear a lot about until the last couple of years.
That's absolutely right. A lot of players like Tansoku, Glory that we see here as well, and obviously in the previous year, B787, all players who have done fantastically well for themselves. And Tansoku just left now with his Even Warlock to advance himself through onto the next elimination match. He will not be through, I believe, to the top 8 quite yet, but he will still be alive, and it would have eliminated Rase and Brazil's hopes to get a representative through to the World Championships.
Now, there's slightly slow-looking hand here for Rase, but the big difference is that card you see on the far left. Nourish, quite often just quick enough in this matchup, as long as you don't get terrorized by too many Mountain Giants on curve from the Even Warlock.
And as you pointed out, there are none at the moment for Tansoku. None of the real threats he wants to throw down, and with a couple of taps beforehand, he could still find a Twilight Drake or a Giant. It's not looking too bad, especially as Rase does not even have a Naturalized to deal with one, But for the moment, I would put Rase slightly in the lead unless Tansoku can get one of those big old threats. As the the eternal question against Evenlock of whether you even attack them at all. Because of Hooked Reaver, the 15 health total, you really don't want to get them down to that point. And I think I actually quite like not attacking here from Rase. If you're going to win as the Taunt Druid, I think generally you're going to be winning in a very decisive fashion with a huge board of taunts.
Also, by drawing Wild Growth to curve perfectly into your Nourish helps as well. But yeah, completely agree. It's not about, you know, aggroing them down with, you know, your curve of taunt minions, which have twice as much health as they do attack. It's not how it's going to work. You're going to get that one huge board state later in the game, and you're going to be able to burst them down sometimes from 30 if necessary. So.
Shields up.
And there, one of the downsides of Even Warlock is while you do have a good amount of cycle in the early stages of the game, if you don't hit that Mountain Giant on turn 3, your ability to cycle through your deck with taps becomes a lot more difficult because you just run out of hand space. So for Rase, the difference of seeing an 8-8 and a 2-3 on turn 3 is just all the difference in the world.
Yeah, and with Hook Reaver just a mile away, Gengar main too expensive, no Drakes, no Giants. There's just no pressure from Tansoku, and he's just staring down a Lich King next turn.
He dead.
Again, he dead! Again, Rase is just deep in the tank on this attack. Does it go face? Does it go into the 2-3 maybe? Like there's a Primordial Drake draw to think about, but who really cares? You're playing Lich King next turn anyway. So yeah, I think in the end he just skips the attack. That makes perfect sense. And Tansoku just has to say, you know what? 4-4 go.
Exactly. Rase's game plan of not attacking face clearly indicating to Tansoku that these Hook Reavers are not going to be active for a very long time. With his hand now, while he still doesn't have those key threats like Mountain Giant or Twilight Drake, what he has managed to find, in addition to exactly Twilight Drake, is obviously the Black Knight to deal with this Lich King in a very decisive fashion. And double Spellbreak, because while for Rase, Hydronox being silenced is not the end of the world, because he could still cube it and then play Witching Hour. 2 Spellbreakers, one for the Hydronox and one for the cube, is a little bit more threatening.
It is. It's also now, you know, Black Knighting a Lich King is a huge tempo swing, and because he had the heads-up play of just playing a 4-4 on the board on the previous turn, it is actually just now significant pressure. This is 10 a turn. So there's also a world where those 2 Spellbreakers just become silence your taunt, push damage, silence your taunt, push damage.
Which is very nice to see from Tansoku, because due to the crazy amount of card draw you get in the early game from Tansoku, the game plan can often be very linear. But with Rase just throwing down a Hadronox here, it's pretty risky, but I think I like it.
This is so weird looking from Tansoku's side, though, because he's starting to dominate this matchup without any of his universally strong cards. He's just drawn all the right tech cards. He has the Black Knight, he has the Spellbreaker, and now he's picked up the Geist as well, which is going to make Rase's ability to engineer good Hadronox positions so much slower if he can't draw Naturalize.
And for Rase, while Doom Pact and the previous game for Tansoku was looking remarkably weak, here for Rase, it's looking a heck of a lot stronger with the ability to go Witching Hour into Doom Pact at a later point if he can get his Hadronox to die. Looks very good indeed.
You could also go Cube Doom Pact right now and just get your 2 Hadronoxes on the board.
Oh.
It's a thought.
It's a pretty cool play. The backup, or I suppose the only other play you're really considering is Primordial Drake on this turn.
That doesn't look great.
It's not that bad. You can kill off the Black Knight, take out the Spellbreaker with your hero power.
Still a lot of minions to be leaving in play when you're just sitting at 14, though. Spellstones and such going if they're able to get through your Primordial Drake. Choose to go for it, though.
Time waits for no one.
I think I actually liked Cube Doom Pact a little bit more. This is like the baseline play that you think of right at the start. But then you have the ability to just go, you have 2 Hadronoxes on the board, you can just go Witching Hour on the next turn to make another one. They can only have so many Spellbreakers.
Tansoku, I believe, is 1 mana off lethal here. If he could Spellbreaker the Primordial Drake, connect for 8, and then just Hellfire. But he has to Hellfire last, that's the problem.
Rase probably will have considered that though with his play.
For Tansoku now, do you just push the damage anyway? You're in such a strong position. The problem is that you don't really have development behind Spellbreaker. If you could Spellbreaker and play another minion here, I think it would be very valid, because you at worst force your opponent to make an armor play, right? Which aren't cheap. They're not cheap plays in the deck. Ferocious Howl is the cheapest, and it still costs, you know, a good third of your opponent's turn.
I think no matter what's happening here, I like the tap first. You're on an odd mana cost. There is no way you can use all your mana without tapping first. And just because the Shroom Brewer doesn't actually make any of your minions survive, I can get on board with this play. Especially because, okay, if you silence the Drake there, put them into Hellfire to death range, they're just so likely going to heal up out of range and play a taunt. They'll have a dead Hadronox. I think it's a very, very good chance that silencing exactly the Lich King after they resurrect a Hadronox is maybe a more likely play to lead to a victory.
I wonder.
It's interesting because I don't like how passive this turn is. Because, yeah, look at Tansoku's reaction now. By not putting any pressure on, you've allowed your opponent to spend 8 mana on doing exactly this. If you just attacked face, put them down to 3 health, suddenly they don't have this much freedom.
And they also don't have a dead Primordial Drake in the pool for Hadronox to resurrect.
Exactly.
I think you've swayed me.
Now, Tansoku, you're in trouble, mate.
He is indeed. Rase had a fantastic curve up to the Lich King, and while Tansoku, I would argue, did a fantastic job of piling on pressure in the early game, maybe we find he's not pushing that advantage quite enough. He's trying to revert back to the traditional even Warlock plan, where you just don't play too aggressive. You just try and develop the biggest attack board you can right now.
In Tansoku's defense, of course, like, we're looking at a hand that had a cube in it and not a naturalize. Tansoku's stance could be to say, well, you know, I don't need to be super aggressive to prevent my opponent doing the Hadronox res play. I can just potentially remove that naturalize from play anyway, and then maybe he just doesn't have the ability to do so. So it's not like there wasn't a logical thought process that went into his play, but I just felt like with the hand that he had, he was running out of steam in 1 or 2 turns, right? Like, he just had to end the game from the position he was in.
However, if he was expecting... Well, okay, so by going for the Skulking Geist to remove the naturalizes, he knows that the only way to kill off a Hadronox on that turn was with Cube, and therefore by going for the Spellbreaker here, there's not actually all too much that Rase can do to truly dominate the board in this scenario, and as Tansoku starts to find some more of his threats, he possibly had his sights set on a slightly more mid to late game plan, which when you're silencing, you've already dealt with a Hadronox and a Witching Hour and a Cube with this scenario, and he's really not that far behind on board, I would argue.
Would you?
He's behind, but he's not that far behind.
Define that far.
I mean, what, if he gets to dictate the trades on the following turn, if Rase plays too aggressive here, Hellfire Defile should just clear up the board.
Sure.
Obviously, he should probably have more respect for Rase to be able to deal with this in a pretty handy fashion.
Very, very different perspectives here, because I feel like he still had his whole turn to develop there, right? Rase was already significantly ahead on board, and he had a whole turn of play to fix that himself, so now he finds himself in this situation. Obviously, I'm not saying Spellbreaking the cube is a huge win for Tansoku. If he's able to get back this board state once, then suddenly Rase has real problems activating another Hadronox. But those problems also start to go away the more and more Death Knight cards that you get in your hand, because those are sometimes your crutches when everything goes out the window.
And I guess the main thing, I suppose, that I could also get on board with what you're saying, an argument against Tansoku's play is, what the crux of it comes down to is how good is even Warlock's ability to seize back board control, which, when he's already played a Hooked Reaver, I would argue it's not that strong. He can make some defensive plays here to seize back the board, but he's taking a lot of damage in the meanwhile, and he doesn't have that much healing to pull things back. The Druid here can just play very aggressive and probably close out the game before Tansoku has the ability to pull back the board.
It's nice to be able to have a reasoned and civil debate with my casting partner. It's not an experience I often get to have at HCT. This is nice. Enjoying it.
Got him.
Yeah. I really hope that got picked up on the microphone, or else it's going to sound really weird.
And as we were pointing out, Rase making the strongest play that he can onto the board, again demanding an answer from Tansoku. And even just dealing with a couple of the minions here, Defile is pretty difficult to do so. It has to be, what, double Defile? Which then the amount of actual development you're doing on anything else is very weak, because you have to play a pitiful little Twilight Drake or a Dread Infernal.
Yeah, it does work out perfectly, though. If Tansoku calculated all of this quickly, then well played. You've played a lot of Warlock, but I saw it after the first Defile was cast that it was going to end up as 6-6 versus 4-6. If Tansoku saw all that as quickly as he made that play, then yeah, he is a better Defile player than I am.
And wow, from Rase, we heard in his soundbite the reasoning for putting Spirit Singer Umbra into the deck, and now we are getting a good look at why you do so. Both Spellbreakers have been used up by Tansoku, and even outside of that, we've got two great big Sleepy Dragons sitting on the board.
Yep, that is the third attempt for Rase to find some value out of his Spirit Singer Umbra. The first two were not very impressive, but this one has potentially brought him back into this series, because he was just, again, starting to run out of steam just that little bit. Without the Witching Hour draw was his one remaining way to push back. Tansoku had started to get a grip on the board, as you were suggesting a few turns ago may have been possible. But yeah, that Spirit Singer Umbra just says good night. So many stats immediately generated on the board, and Derek, I feel like we've been talking and setting this up the whole series. It's very nearly Taunt Warrior time.
I think it is. It's the only deck left available for Rase here, as we end up 2 games apiece. And up against Tansoku's Evenlock, I would argue it's not that bad of a matchup. All the things that you have to do against Evenlock are there. You have to be able to pass their opening tests of even the Giant and the Twilight Drake, which Warrior can do. They got Execute and they got Shield Slam to make pretty quick work of it. And even if they don't, they have so many cheap taunts in Rase's build that he can just delay the game until the quest is built. And then it's going to be very powerful in that matchup indeed, I would argue.
Is it somewhere where maybe Rase's little anti-aggro build that he has, or the super fast turbo quest build that he has, is that going to cost him or benefit him in the matchup, do you think?
I think it's probably going to be benefiting him here, because he's also got, while it's a very low curve version, it's a very high draw version. He's got Battle Rage in there as well, which means as long as he's getting that draw constantly and doesn't just run out of threats, the quicker he completes the quest, the more likely he is to take the series.
Yeah, I think the Battle Rage is a big deal, right? Because I saw this list first being played, I believe it was HCT Seoul, we were casting in Korea, and there were players who were playing like a Shield Bearer Wax Elemental version, but they just didn't have Battle Rage.
Right.
And I was casting with Admirable, I think, at the time, and you know, Wax Elemental or a Shield Bearer was drawn. I was like, wow, I haven't seen this list. I assume he's just trying to refill with Battle Rage and just turbo the quest.
Yep.
Picked up the deck lists, no Battle Rage. Couldn't work out what on earth was going on, but yeah, Rase does have plenty more options than we were seeing in Seoul to be able to go late against these slightly slower decks than him and just be able to turbo out that quest for just maximum damage.
Does indeed, and this is what it all comes down to. The player who loses this single game of Hearthstone will be eliminated from the HCT Summer Championships. And for Rase, a respectable hand to get things going with. Execute, as I mentioned, that answer to one of the first big threats. And outside of that, I absolutely agree. You just want to be looking for card draw, pretty much. Acolyte of Pain, Battle Rage. Because your deck has so many cheap taunts in there anyway, you don't really need to be keeping the likes of Cornered Sentry.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, this is the moment for Rase. He hitched his wagon to this very unusual build of the Taunt Warrior, and now his championship life depends on it. Likewise, with Tansoku, choice to bring even Warlock, which has been a very heavily targeted deck in the tournament. It comes down to that deck for him as well. Very fitting.
And so I know one of the caster's favorite stories to talk about the Taunt Warrior, as we do get to see some of the interesting tech decisions there in Ironbeak Owl as well, which when I was asking Twitter about how you beat the Taunt Druid with Ironbeak Owl, they said that's one of the best ways you can do it, but as I diverged with the inclusions there, One of the favorite stories of casters about Taunt Warrior is how it evolved in terms of play style with how you meter out your removal. And do you think for cards like Brawl and Execute, what's the main reason you're using them for in this matchup?
Against the Even Warlock, I think Execute you can be forced to use, right? By the early Giant, by the early threat. Brawl is a finisher. I think most of the time you're going to try and use it to, after you've got your Sulphurous Hero Power online, get those 50-50 face shots, or even better, you know, Brawl, have some other way of killing the last minion, guarantee the 8 damage to face. Do that a couple of times, it's going to be game over, because Tansoku is going to be putting so much work into lowering his own health to get those hooked Reavers online that you're not going to need more than 2 or perhaps 3 of those 8 damage shots to face to end the game.
As now for Rase, again, a pretty respectable hand. And that's one of the things that this very low curve version of the Warrior does. I think pretty much every starting hand you end up with usually ends up looking pretty good because you've got a bunch of draw cards at the start. Obviously with Battle Rage and Acolyte of Pain, so many cheap taunts knocking about there as well. You can't really draw a hand that's too heavy.
What do you think about this turn 2 Doomsayer from Tansoku, by the way? We didn't really talk about it. But he's playing first here, so he wasn't on the draw where he was like fully obligated to play things out of his hand. He just kind of did tempo it out there on turn 2.
I think he's trying to deny a very specific play actually with this Doomsayer, which is exactly Acolyte of Pain into Blood Razor, which is a very real consideration to take into effect, because as I mentioned so much, Rase here, his main plan is to make sure he doesn't run out of cards and gets that draw going. And for Tansoku, obviously he needs to be putting his own threats on the board, but denying card draw is very high up on his list of priorities.
Yeah, I think also possibly Acolyte of Pain coming down on 3 can often be the Execute activator, right?
Good
that
point.
You need them with the Twilight Drake and the Mountain Giant. You suddenly ask an extra question if they don't have that source of 1 damage on the board. It's not just good enough to have Execute.
And that's a good point. You make Execute is not enough here to kill off the Twilight Drake, but even then, I would question if Rase actually wants to go for the Execute on this Twilight Drake whatsoever. As you mentioned, Brawl wants to be saved for later on in the game to close things out. So in the mid stages of the game, we see a Mountain Giant or a Lich King even. Rase wants to save that Execute for a very high priority target.
Yeah, I'd be inclined to agree with that, but I think Tansoku definitely gave himself some freedom to say, you know, top deck that Mountain Giant on the turn where he played the Drake, right? And then because he'd set up that clear board, he could have then gone for that early Mountain Giant, which would have been so much pressure. Perhaps, you know, even Hellfiring then in this spot just to push massive amounts of damage. Instead, he's just going to go solid with the Shroom Brewer, just start to consolidate a board. And already, you're just starting to see how low value the minions in Rase's deck are. This Shield Bearer's in hand, the Phantom Militia is some way away from being any kind of decent gas, and then Tar Creeper as well. This is not the Curator Direhorn days of Taunt Warrior anymore.
It is not indeed, but for Rase, I would be very unsurprised to be keeping on with the game plan he's going for. As we see here, Tar Creeper just coming down because he knows that he is giving his opponent value trade after value trade, but he's got 2 copies of Brawl to clean up the mess afterwards.
Any surprise at the Execute being used? You did mention that you felt like it would be held onto for a bigger threat later in the game.
I am actually somewhat surprised by that, especially with the pickup of another copy of Brawl. The game plan I anticipated that Rase would be going down was pretty simply, you just play a bunch of taunt minions, let your opponent overcommit to the board because they're just value trading, so all their minions are surviving. And then you follow up with Brawl to clear off the entire board, and you're still at a very healthy life total. And now for Rase, the obvious downside of his play is he is left against 1 single big minion, and he's got 2 Brawls, but no Execute.
Right. And I definitely feel like as Taunt Warrior, you can take a beating from a Twilight Drake a couple of times. It's not a huge deal. And now, so 2 out of 6 on the taunt counter that you just saw. Playing Phantom Militia out for 2 here puts him out of 4, and then with only Shield Bearer in hand, he's still another draw away from being able to fill out the counter. Just feels pressured by this 6/6 to have to put some walls in the way.
Absolutely, but a lot of good draws available for Rase to start clearing things up in his favor, or at least cycling through his deck to find those taunts. Warpath to go in combination with the Acolyte of Pain, or even just a Blood Razor to get that draw going is of the utmost importance here.
Tansoku has definitely been the more stoic of the two players this series. Really hasn't shown any signs of stress, any signs of letting anything get on top of him. And I guess it's a mark of someone that's felt he was in a comfortable position in the series. Rase, on the other hand, has been emotive and stressed and fidgeting in his seat, grimacing, spreading across his face the whole time. If anything, he's starting to look a little more calm and focused than ever at this moment.
I mean, I think coming into this series, ending up at 2 games apiece with a respectable matchup to finish things off has to be better than he was expecting going in. He had some truly dreadful matchups, forced to ban that Hunter so that it couldn't prey on all of his slow control decks, and he's still just not in all that bad of a position. As I mentioned, Acolyte into Blood Razor here feels fantastic to keep that draw going. So important.
Oh. Somewhere not too far away from here, Reynad is just squealing with delight as Shield Bearer is seeing HCT play in 2018.
What a time to be alive. And now for Tansoku, with a fairly threatening board already in play, do you think here he just goes for maximum tempo play, throws down the biggest thing he can, leaving himself vulnerable to some of the AoE clear? Or does he go for some of the more auxiliary plays of going for like Spellbreaker on the Acolyte of Pain to not commit too much to the board?
I think because he can kill the Acolyte here quite nicely, he's okay to go with the Lich King, but even then he's choosing not to. Okay, now this does surprise me a little bit, because one of the things that you always had to learn about Patron Warrior is that denying one card was huge, and that applies to any Battle Rage deck, because a Battle Rage deck card draw snowballs. If they can draw one card, that gets them closer to the cards that draw more cards.
Yep.
So each individual card draw that you can deny is worth more than it feels like at face value. And that's kind of how Race's deck is built. He only has that one copy of Battle Rage, one copy of Azalina Soul Thief. So denying him abilities to get closer to that definitely seems valid in my opinion.
As now Rase is faced with some very difficult decisions here. Obviously, the first thing that one would look at is just going all out on Acolyte card draw, because he knows how important it is in this matchup. If you're even afraid of overdrawing, you could throw out a Brawl on the very same turn to make sure you're not drawing too many cards and you're still throwing out some of the less important cards in your hand. Then the downside is you're straight up taking 8 damage from Lich King, and if you don't kill it off, that is going to start snowballing towards you incredibly quickly.
And yeah, Tansoku has shown that this is paying out for him, because it's now very likely that Acolyte does not get to draw any cards from this position, let alone one. Rase chooses not to even throw it into the Lich King preemptively. He wanted that extra percentage chance for one of his minions to live over the opportunity of drawing one card. And I kind of question that decision as well. I really want to snowball some card draw here if I'm in Race's position.
I quite drastically disagree with his play and agree with you there, because look at his hand now. It was obviously a pretty specific scenario where he had to use also the Death Rattle from the Blood Razor, but his card draw is nothing now. Like the Acolyte of Pain without an activator almost definitely just gets silenced from his opponent. The pickup of Warpath does turn things around quite drastically here though. That'll do it.
That'll do, Pig. That'll do.
And Rase doesn't really even need to think about it for too long here. Again, just needing to get through to some of those taunts. Phantom Militia, more than enough to complete the quest here. And now things really are going to start heating up for Rase. His opponent down to only 17 health. He's only going to need a few rag shots to go face, and he will be advancing through to the next stage.
What on earth do I know about playing Shield Bearer, Battle Rage, Taunt Warrior? This is Race's deck. Trust him. He knows what he's doing.
What now?
Still would have traded the Acolyte.
I still would also have traded the Acolyte there. And now just trying to math out the exact values of the breakpoints of his mana on the next turn so that he can play a taunt, equip Sulfuras, and get in that all-important Ragnaros hero power as quick as possible. But for Tansoku, he's deciding to throw down Blood Reaper Gul'dan, and now we enter an even more interesting point of the game where, although Rase will obviously be getting a fantastic hero power, Tansoku's is not all that much worse, and his quest was just play Gul'dan.
Draw and play a 10-mana card that the developers put in the game for you. Facts.
How long can this go on?
There it is, quest complete. Sulfuras now available, and it's a pretty juicy Sulfuras board. Just chop down a 2/4 and then has a very nice 2 out of 3 to take 6 additional power off the board.
Absolutely, and it's pretty important for Rase to start hitting
Never mind.
those minions. Do you think that's good for him in this scenario to go face?
I think it's fine. There wasn't really a bad target there because as we set up at the start, Brawl is still in hand, right? So if you can start pushing damage, this board is going to get brawlable.
That's fair.
The downside is that it will get brawlable, which is a word I'm going to continue to say because it sounds hilarious. It will get brawlable quicker than it would have done otherwise, right? Which means potentially you're forced to use your brawl and then it's out of your hand and not usable in the future. So if you need to clear more than one board state, it can get you in trouble.
That's exactly right, and this is where the weakness of the warrior hero power comes into effect. It's targeted randomly, you can't choose where to send it. So with Tansoku having all these small annoying minions, Spellbreaker, Sun Fury Protector, even a giant that can hide amongst them, it could be very difficult for Rase to get those hero powers to go where he wanted to, especially because he did not prioritize card draw on that all-important brawl turn.
Right.
And as a direct result of that, he does not have the cards like Execute and Shield Slam to manipulate the minions on board to get those hero powers to go where he wants.
Okay, I like... Tansoku was definitely feeling a little bit pressured by the rope there and went back and forth between Sun Fury and the Death Grip. I really don't like him playing the Sun Fury in that position, just because he knows if there isn't a brawl being used on this turn, his board is in fantastic shape regardless. He has double Hellfire to burst from hand, so it's not like he needs to load up, front load a bunch of damage. Just make sure if Brawl comes down, you have the best odds of just a big, thick minion surviving.
Absolutely, and just a follow-up to it. He wants to make sure even if Brawl into everything's cleared off, on the next turn, Sun Fury Giant, Mountain Giant, something like that, would feel very strong just to give yourself the highest chance of a minion that can deliver lethal.
Here come the nice little Raptors though, and Rase is now back to that stressed looking Grimace, and he needs a good outcome here. Gets it. That is a 1-1. And not where he wanted that to go though.
It's a very tenacious little 1-1 Raptor there, as now Tansoku can massively load up onto the board on this turn. He's seen Execute. He's seen 2 brawls. I'm thinking Mountain Giant into Drake, into Sun Fury Protector.
I'm thinking all of the things, Derek.
What can Rase do? He just has to load up on the board with taunts, at which point there's no taunts that survive double Hellfire.
Is the Sun Fury necessary? I was going to say, yeah, I prefer pinging to the Sun Fury, just because 24 is a number that you do in some weird worlds want to get yourself outside of at some point. It is 3/8, which is relevant, and it's 3 damage instead of 2, and you get to do the same again next turn. Seems to check out. If you're trying to end the game this turn, pinging is just more damage in terms of the turn 2-turn lethal setup, sorry.
So now for Rase, he could obviously try and rely on the power of a Phantom Militia to protect him against all this damage. We can see, however, double Hellfire would very handily end the game in Tansoku's favor. So does he then make the read of going, what, Iron Beak Owl, Blood Razor, and try and snipe off the Mountain Giant? Both feel pretty bad to me.
They feel desperate. I think the Owl play potentially has more upside, but by shooting first, I think what Rase is thinking there is that he allowed the hero power to make his decision for him. Okay. He left himself with a 2 out of 3 to take care of a big minion. If it got the Mountain Giant, best target, then he gets to clear the Drake. If it gets the Drake, then he has to taunt up with the Phantom Militias. So he gave himself, kind of the 50-50 option select as to how he was going to play it.
However, now for Rase, it's looking unbelievably dire. With double Hellfire and hero power for Tansoku, he has to find some armor gain on the following turn, or the game is simply over and Tansoku will have won.
Yeah, all of this Stonehill defender nonsense is just a facade at this point. Tansoku's game plan is very clear, and if Rase likes, the only real usage of that Azalina Soul Thief will be to find out just how dead he is.
Absolutely. No real way for Rase to pull this back, and in a devastating fashion. One of my favorites before seeing the deck list to advance through to the World Championship. Rase is just going to be eliminated.
I wonder.
Play it.
Do the thing.
He is, of course, considering blind here. What options can my opponent have in hand that are relevant for 3 mana if I play Azalina Soul Thief? How often do I die through the Phantom Militia board? Because the board is almost irrelevant, right? The thing that clears the Phantom Militia is double Hellfire, which kills you anyway, regardless of the board state. So it's often just worth ignoring that. But Rase is just going to go through his final motions here. We're not going to get to see the Azalina come down. Instead, it's the double Phantom Militia. And Tansoku, after going through an absolute roller coaster in a series he would have felt very, very good on early on, is going to put the finishing touches on with the Hellfires. And Race's very risky meta read in this tournament is not going to pay out. Perhaps with a different group, we could have seen a different story, but still, a fantastic competitor is going to bow out. Tansoku will continue to fly the flag for Japan through to the Deciders game later on.
And absolute commiserations to Rase.